and for the last 15 years I've studied voting machines and voting systems as well. And I thank the Board of Elections for the opportunity to address you. I know your time is valuable, so I will be brief. I want to speak about and advise against the adoption of touchscreen ballot marking devices, except for voters who cannot mark a ballot by hand. All computerized voting machines can be hacked. There's no way to make that a completely hack-proof voting machine. We can ask the vendors to make them as hack-resistant as possible, and we can try and test them for hack resistance, but we can't make them hack-proof, and we can't demand that of the vendors. If a paperless touchscreen voting machine is hacked and it lies about the vote counts, there's no recourse and no way to detect that. So New York State very wisely avoided the adoption of paperless touchscreen voting machines when many other states rushed into that 20 years ago. And the machines New York State uses now, which are optical scanners, although they can be hacked too, you still have in the ballot box the paper ballots that the voters mark themselves, and a human recount by people who are harder to hack will get the right count of the votes that the voters actually indicated. Now, there are some touchscreen ballot marking devices on the market, and all of them have the following problem. Although they show a paper ballot that the voter can review, and in principle the voter could detect if the hacked machine is printing a different vote on the paper ballot than they indicated on the screen, a study in Tennessee has shown with real voters in a real polling place that the vast majority of the voters do not review their paper ballot very carefully. Most voters don't even look at it at all. And if most of the voters are not reviewing their paper ballot, then they will not be able to detect if a hacked voting machine is printing a different vote on the paper ballot than the one they indicated. Furthermore, even if suppose the machine is, cheating on 10% of the ballots to try and shift an election by about 10%, and 10% of the voters are alert enough to actually look, and 5% of those voters look down at the race for county commissioner, then something like 1 in 200 voters will notice that the machine is printing a different vote on the paper than they indicated on the touchscreen. And that voter can raise her hand, and what's the poll worker to do? Well, presumably the Board of Elections gives instructions to that poll worker to say, well, maybe you made a mistake, maybe the machine is not working, we'll void that ballot and you get another chance. So for that alert voter, the machine has not stolen her vote. But the hacked machine can steal the votes of all the other voters who are not paying attention. And you might think, well, if the machine is consistently printing fraudulent votes on the paper, then people will notice and you'll detect that the machine is hacked. If you do the math, that means only 3 or 4 voters in the course of a day will raise their hand and say that the machine did something wrong. And that itself is not evidence that the machine is hacked, because we don't know what the voter indicated on the touchscreen, and to preserve the secret ballot, we must not know what the voter indicated on the touchscreen. So even though some voters can know for themselves that the machine misprinted their ballot, the election administrators, the poll workers in the polling place cannot know that. You can't invalidate a whole election just because a few voters raised their hand and said the machine mismarked my vote. That would be inappropriate. If you were to invalidate elections on that basis, then people could cheat the other way and make false claims that the machine invalidated their vote. So this is an essential problem with ballot marking devices. And we don't have this problem with the use of a pen to fill in an oval. The vote that the voter indicates on the paper is the vote they indicate on the paper. There's no computer manipulating how it's presented on the paper for use in a recount. That's the main thing I want to say. I'll briefly add 1 or 2 other things. The hybrid machines that pass the paper ballot under a print head into the ballot box after the last time the voter gets to see what's on the paper are even more dangerous. I'd really advise against the adoption of those machines, as such a voting machine can leave a few races unvoted, especially where the voter really did do an undervote, leave a blank space, and then fill it in later with a fraudulent vote. So really you should not adopt those machines. And finally, what's printed on the paper ballot or filled in by the voter on the paper ballot, is your ultimate defense against hacked or hackable voting machines. And so the ability to recount the paper ballots is what you have to protect yourself against computer hacking. But the paper ballots don't do much good if you never look at them. And so I would urge New York State to consider the adoption of risk-limiting audits. That's a way to take a small statistical sample of the paper ballots and recount them by hand. Now, no state should roll out risk-limiting audits statewide all at once. It's an administrative procedure that takes time to learn how to do and to train the county election administrators on what it's for and how to do it. It would be worth doing some pilots to experiment with the procedures. And that way you can be sure that even if someone were to hack your voting machine, you could detect it and you could correct it without having to do a do-over election. And I thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have.
Thank you.
No, thank you. I appreciate your coming.
Okay.
Actually, may I ask a question?
I just want to say one thing.
No.
You want to speak?
I just wanted to ask a question of Professor Appel.
I don't know. What do you know?